I don't know how far down we'll go. There might be some that we throw out on the fly and just have to go with, because I
Yeah.
have 20 names on my list, and I know there's more than 20 names, so I forgot someone. So we're gonna go through this list. But obviously we're gonna start at the top. Let's start with JT Miller. Regular season, relative expectations, I gave him an A+.
Yeah, same A+.
Okay, playoffs.
I had him an A-.
Okay, I had him as a B+. I thought he was really, really good, but I thought the infamous the text game where it was, yeah, I'm sorry about how bad I played, and I know he responded really well. Um, that really hurt his letter grade for me when I was looking at, relative to expectations. And I also took into consideration that because he exceeded expectations so greatly in the regular season, I just naturally had a bit higher expectations for the playoffs. Maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh because he really was their best player in the playoffs. But I also looked at that game 7 performance and just said, like, yeah, you know what? It was another one of those games where you wanted to see more from JT Miller. So ultimately I gave him a B+, but an A- as well is very, very defensible. I also think a B+ is a good grade. Like, that's a good grade to get.
Yeah, it's splitting hairs at that point. The reason I gave him a bit of a bump is just the way I looked at it is he tied Boeser for the club's playoff scoring lead. He won nearly 60% of his faceoffs. He was heavy physical with his style of play, and he excelled defensively too. Like the Canucks only conceded 1.81 goals against per hour during Miller's 5-on-5 shifts. And um, ultimately in that Edmonton series, even though he struggled in game 6 and 7 offensively, was pointless. Ultimately, the Canucks held McDavid to a 2-2 draw in 5-on-5 goals during the 58 minutes and 49 seconds that Miller played head to head against McDavid. So I gave him a bit of an edge considering that context of, well, he played matchup minutes against McDavid there.
Okay, Brock Boeser, he's my only A+, A+. And obviously Thatcher Demko, like, what are we doing, right? We're not gonna split hairs on Thatcher Demko, but Brock Boeser, in terms of guys who played all of the playoffs, I know he missed one game at the end there, but Brock Boeser is my A+, A+ player. A+ in the regular season, A+ in the playoffs.
Yeah, I had him A regular season, A+ playoffs. So pretty much the
I
same thing.
I also kind of wrestled with that a bit just because it felt like, obviously he scored 40 goals, which is awesome. But like there were some stretches there where he was less effective than you would have liked. So again, A+. Again, let's try not to split hairs too much there,
Yeah.
but I think that's a good letter grade. Okay, Elias Pettersson. What did you put for this? Because Elias Pettersson's season was a tale of two halves. After the All-Star break, he was much less effective in all areas of the ice, and that kind of went into the playoffs as well. So ultimately, I had Elias Pettersson relative to expectations. I know he put up points again. I had Elias Pettersson at a B- for the regular season. I had him at a C+ for the playoffs.
I had him at a B+ for the regular season and a C- for the playoffs.
C-.
For the regular,
Okay.
yeah, like sure, 89 points. That's probably closer to the floor of what Pettersson's capable of. But ultimately, there were only 6 full-time centers in the NHL that had more points than Pettersson. And you look at those names, and it was McKinnon, McDavid, Matthews, Draisaitl, Miller, and Sidney Crosby. So ultimately, even in a season where he struggled down the stretch, I think we forget how dominant he was in the first half of the season too. Like this is a player that entered the All-Star break on pace for 47 goals and 107 points. Right? I think we forget that just because he's struggled now for what's felt like 2 or 3 months. But I thought he fared. I still think he brought the goods overall in the regular season, and then playoffs. I think it was harsher than you on him.
Okay. I know we said we were sticking with top players, but let's go in order of the lineup. Next up, Ilya Mikheyev. Ilya Mikheyev, I had him at a C- for the regular season and a D+ / buy this guy out for the playoffs.
I had him a C+ for the regular season and an F for the playoffs. It's the only F that any player has gotten in these letter grades. I was a little bit higher in the regular season just because it's remarkable looking at the first 2 months what the numbers look like. I actually want to pull it up because it's hard to It's hard to believe, and I have to command F it. So just give me a second
Take your
here.
time. And for those that missed yesterday's show, we opened yesterday's show by seeing that Rob Williams, our pal over at Daily Hive, wrote an article about if the Canucks should buy out Mikheyev, and it was a bit of a pros and cons thing. And Harmon and I, right before the show, were like, we haven't done the math on it. We haven't looked at the buyout calculator, the savings the Canucks get, all that. And we looked it up, and immediately I was like, no, they have to buy out Ilya Mikheyev. Like, it has to happen. It's not even a conversation in my mind.
Yeah, so this is actually wild to think about. This is right before the calendar flipped to 2024, so December 31st. Mikheyev ranked top 25 among all NHL forwards with 10 5-on-5 goals in 32 games, which was tied with Sam Reinhart, Robert Thomas, Braden Point, and Alex DeBrincat. And his 19 5-on-5 points in that same stretch were one back of Elias Pettersson and JT Miller for the lead among Canucks forwards.
Wow.
Like, isn't that incredible? The first 2 months of the season, he was actually on one.
So this is recency bias against me, I suppose, because I was ready for the failing grade. Like I said, C minus, right? C minus for McCabe. Yeah, C minus regular season, D minus for the playoffs. Yeah. Yeah, that is surprising. And honestly, I did forget that. But we're going to save, like we said yesterday, we're saving the Mikheyev buyout conversation for at least next week. Let's move down the list a little further here. I have Pius Suter next, is the next name I have written down.
Cool.
What do you have for him?
I had an A minus for him in the regular season and a B minus for him in the playoffs.
Okay. I had an A for the regular season because I thought he was very versatile. And again, an A minus and an A, you probably are saying all the same reasons as me. Very versatile, made that Miller line better, fit in really well with them. And if there's no Pius Suter playing the way he played, the Canucks have a lot more problems in the regular season. So I went with an A there, and then I thought the Magic kind of died in the playoffs, so I had him at a B in the playoffs. Okay, now we're getting to the fun names here. Dakota Joshua, relative to expectations, and I don't know where not to get too technical into what we're measuring here, but expectations for me also include Rick Tocchet calling you out on the first day of camp. Like, to me, that lowers your expectations quite a bit. Or in fact, I guess it raises them for what the coach expects of you. But if we were doing projections at the start of the year, Harm, I didn't project this season for Dakota Joshua at all. He is going to make a lot of money in free agency. I have Dakota Joshua at an A+ for the regular season, but then I have him at a B+ for... what did I have him at? Hold on, I actually have to look. No, excuse me, I had him at a B for the playoffs. I had him at a B. Had a couple strong game ones, but really, Jeff said it yesterday. Jeff Patterson, when he was on our show, pointing out, threw a lot of hits, did a lot of different things when you look at the score sheet, but how many games did Dakota Joshua really leave a mark on? I think it's 2 or 3 is the answer out of all the games the Canucks played in the playoffs.
Yeah, totally fair. And the other thing to keep in mind is, like, he had the 4 goals, but he only had 9 shots on goal in the entire playoffs, which is pretty crazy to think about. So if even a couple of those hadn't gone in, I mean, that's pretty fortunate when you look at that shooting percentage, right? So that could have easily impacted the bottom line production. So I had him at an A- in the regular season and a B- in the playoffs. The only thing to keep in mind as we sort of discuss his performance in the playoffs is he was adjusting to more difficult matchups, right? So during the regular season, that line with him and Garland was consistently going up against the opposition's third line. But in the playoffs, because now they had Elias Lindholm, Rick Tocchet had a ton of defensive trust in Lindholm, and because Pettersson was struggling and was mostly getting third line matchups, that Joshua Garland line was seeing a lot of Ryan O'Reilly in round 1, was seeing a lot of Leon Draisaitl in round 2. So that's, of course, context to keep in mind. But look, in the regular season, they were dominant together, right? Their underlying numbers, possession, goal differential, one of the best lines in the NHL from a statistical perspective, and that just didn't quite translate to the playoffs. Where they had their spurts where they took over and won games, but I think you were definitely left looking for a little bit more out of Joshua in the playoffs, considering how strong he was in the regular season.
Okay, so sticking with this line, I have Conor Garland next. I have him at an A and an A. Not an A plus. I had him at an A in the regular season and an A in the playoffs. I'm not going to nitpick and try to pick negatives, but one thing that came to mind was that he had stints with Elias Pettersson, and if it was an A plus, you'd hope he could maybe drive a top six line a little bit more than we actually saw in the regular season. So I don't know how much that is against Conor Garland, but I had him at an A. I had him at an A, and I had him at an A in the playoffs as well.
Yeah, I had him at an A in the regular season and a B plus in the playoffs. I mean,
Mm.
his passion, his competitiveness, a lot of those intangibles, right? One of the only players to actually show up with some jump, with some urgency, with some desperation in a game seven. And to me, to have that type of playoff performance, that cements him in my mind as, I don't know if you want to call him necessarily a core player, but he's not expendable anymore to me. Like, he's a guy that I need as a driver in my middle six now, especially since we don't know what's going to happen with Joshua. He may walk in free agency. I think this is the year where he went from potential misfit to, geez, he's one of the most important drivers in this lineup.
Okay, Teddy Blueger, part of the line, right? Like he part of the line for most of the season. I had Teddy Blueger at a B in the regular season and a C plus in the playoffs. I thought really good, really exceeded expectations to start the year, and that's going to be the topic of our poll question: is who exceeded expectations the most in the playoffs? Teddy Blueger exceeded expectations a lot in the regular season to start, but then by the end, the magic just seemed to kind of be gone, and he was fine. Like he was playing like a fourth line center, which is what you thought you were getting when you got him. But especially in the playoffs as well, it kind of became evident that the magic just wasn't there on that line when Teddy Blueger was a part of it.
Sure, but I also cut him some slack because his fourth line mates were frankly pretty terrible. Like Sam Lafferty fell off a cliff. We're going to be talking about him. Hit a lot of fieldy Giuseppe, some Nils Aman, some Vasily Podkolzin. Like, he didn't have many actually good wingers on when he bumped down the lineup to play in a fourth line role. And ultimately, to me, this is a player who was signed to be a fourth line center. He chipped in with 28 points in the regular season, and he was clearly the third wheel on that line with Joshua and Garland. But to me, if you're able to step into a role as a third line center when you're not really a 3C, and that line becomes one of the best third lines in the NHL, like, that's a massive credit there. So I had an A minus, I believe, for Blueger in the regular season and a B minus in the playoffs. I also give him a lot of credit because of what he did to help turn the penalty kill around as a first unit fixture. I think that impact was massive.
Yeah, I think your grade is a little more fair than mine when it comes to Teddy Blueger. Okay, now we're moving down the lineup quite a bit. You mentioned him, Sam Lafferty, had him at a C plus in the regular season and a C in the playoffs.
So I hated Lafferty's playoffs, C minus. I just was left wondering, where's the speed, the size, the physicality that we saw from him in the regular season. Now, the regular season, I give him a B plus, which might sound high, and I know he faded down the stretch, but he chipped in 13 goals, right? And during the first half of the season, like, remember when he was first acquired with Blueger out, I believe he was centering the fourth line, and not just centering it, but legitimately driving play, scoring goals. He was putting defenders on their heels. He was drawing penalties. Like, he was so noticeable and impactful on a night in, night out basis. And ultimately, again, you get 13 goals out of a fourth liner. That's terrific production for me. So even though he slowed down the stretch in the regular season, I was, when looking at his overall body of work, impressed with what he did over 82 games. And then, of course, just really disappointed with his playoffs.
Okay, let's talk about Nils Hoglander, who in the regular season I gave him an A plus. This was a breakout year for Nils Hoglander, and then in the playoffs, with those expectations of being an impact player like that, I gave him a C minus.
Yeah, basically bang on with what I had him at. I had him with an A in the regular season, especially not just what he did offensively, but as the season progressed, for him to earn Rick Tocchet's trust to take on a top six role. And for a while there, from the All-Star break till the end of the campaign, he was able to stick as Elias Pettersson's running mate. And I know Pettersson individually was still struggling, but Pettersson on many nights gave that line a spark, was forechecking, was energy, 5-on-5 production. But I'm right there with you. Playoffs was disappointing. Hopefully, it's a learning experience. I had him at a C- for the playoffs as well.
Yeah. And I think that's very fair. I think that's a very fair grade for Nils Hoglander. Okay, who do we have left? We got PDG, Nils Aman. Do you want to do Podkolzin? Like, do you want to?
Sure, yeah, we can do Podkolzin.
I don't want to give a hard take on Podkolzin, but it's becoming increasingly clear, it feels, that he's just going to be a guy. Like, he's not going to be like, I think the idea that he's ever going to become a top 6, top 9 forward, like, he's going to be a grinding winger. And really, I don't know why he's not killing penalties regularly, or why he wasn't doing that in Abbotsford, why that, and we've been seeing this for 2 years on this show. Why isn't Vasily Podkolzin becoming a penalty killer? Because if he's ever going to stick at the NHL, it feels like that's what he's going to do. Is he's going to have to be like a grinder. He's going to have to be, a third, fourth line winger. He's not going to drive play. He's not the best finisher. I don't know what to think about Vasily Podkolzin, but I think it's just become increasingly clear, especially with these playoffs and this regular season that we saw from him, that it's like he's probably never going to be like a regular must-have NHLer.
Yeah, for sure. I gave him a C for the regular season. And I know people will say, well, he had spurts where he was bringing energy and physicality, but ultimately, this is a player who had 0 goals and just 2 assists in 18 games. And as you mentioned, what is he bringing to the table? Maybe he can carve out a role as an energy, physical presence type of guy, but defensively, he's still not trusted by his coaches. Like, there's a reason that it took him so long to draw into the playoff lineup, whether it's right or wrong in the coach's mind. They still don't have that full faith in him, and that's part of the reason why he hasn't been developed as a penalty killer. Podkolzin is, like, I truly believe that had his development path gone a different way, that he actually still had the tools to be a good middle 6 forward at one point. I don't think he's going to hit it now, but I think it's between the ears for him. I really believe that. I think he's too afraid of making mistakes.
Yep.
I think it goes back to when he was in the KHL for so many years. And the thing is, when you're a player that has a lot of potential, you need to be given opportunity. You need to feel like the man. You need to be put in a role where your responsibility is to drive offense, is to create chances, to produce, to feel like the go-to guy, to play power play 1, to play first unit PK. But in SCA, when every other player his age category is playing a frontline role in the NCAA or in junior hockey, he's out here playing like 7-8 minutes a night in the KHL. He's worried about stepping on eggshells. Really, that's what it is. He's so afraid of making a mistake that he doesn't trust his instincts at all, because he knows the second I make a mistake, I'm going to get benched. And so he's become the ultimate, like, safe player. I even remember when he first got sent down to Abbotsford, I think maybe it was last season, that I had a conversation with Ryan Johnson, and they tried to tell him, like, one of the things that they want him to do is play less of a safe game and, like, move his feet more, look to actually dictate. That just has never really come to fruition, and it's why he'll, unfortunately, probably be nothing more than a replacement level 4th line fringe guy, despite having a lot of NHL traits.
Yep. And I mean, not to just zero in on Podkolzin and rag on him, but this is why it's so important that the picks you make hit, because a guy taken later in that draft, Thomas Harley, like, he's having a huge impact on the Dallas Stars. We have to be the Canucks podcast that brings up Thomas Harley more than any other podcast when we talk about the Dallas Stars and how they're succeeding and how that might be a blueprint for how the Canucks can succeed over the next few years. Like, Thomas Harley taken in that draft, Tobias Bjornfot, he's picked up awards votes before. He was also taken in that draft. But in all seriousness, like, Dylan Holloway, look at the impact Dylan Holloway started to make in that series. That's kind of an under-discussed portion of the second round series with the Canucks and Oilers was how Holloway stepped in. I know you and I touched on it yesterday, Harm, but man, yeah, like you look at it and just say like, how different does this Canucks lineup look if Podkolzin is a real impact player?
Yeah, and of course, to clarify, I'm sure you're not like Holloway and Podkolzin were different draft classes, I believe, and but it's more just about like you take your sort of mid-ish first round pick, and like you need that guy to hit, because even in specifically Podkolzin's draft year in 2019, Boldy was taken shortly after, Caulfield was taken shortly after. It's definitely an unfortunate miss there.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, nothing's gonna be as bad as the Ollie Levy miss, right? Like we're not doing that. We're not doing the Ollie Levy thing here. But yeah, Holloway was the 2021, I think, or no, he was 2020, and Podkolzin was 2019. That's it. Yeah,
I think
Holloway
so,
was
yeah.
Holloway was the weird COVID draft or whatever. Or no, that, I guess the COVID draft was the 2021. Anyways, moving on from that, let's get to our next player on the list, Nils Aman. Like, what are we expecting from Nils Aman? Like, how are you giving a letter grade to Nils Aman? I gave Nils Aman a B. Like, I gave Nils Aman a B in the regular season. I gave him a C plus in the playoffs. He was fine.
Yeah, just a shrug, and he was fine. Is probably the best way to sum up
Yeah.
Oman. I think you were too kind on his regular season personally, because I didn't see a significant enough year-over-year improvement. Right?
Mm.
Last year he was a surprise as like, okay, this guy coming over from Sweden makes a team out of camp. He can hang in an NHL role. There's clearly some room to improve. And then I even remember watching him in training camp and thinking, man, he, from a physical tools perspective, has leveled up. Like, he looked faster, he looked stronger, and yet he didn't actually take the next step in his play during the regular season. And to me, he's a player at this point that is reliable enough defensively that he's not going to hurt you, and he can play second unit PK minutes. So there's some value in that. But to me, he needs to become an elite faceoff man, right? If you want to stick as like an everyday fourth line center, he has to find that niche as an elite faceoff guy, because right now he is awful at draws, and that's just too much to overcome if you're trying to be like this defensive utility fourth line center.
Yeah, and the thing I was looking for the most with him on was just his ability to not get pushed off the puck so easy. And I think that was the thing that Rick Tocchet really spoke about at the end of last season, was this idea that if you're going to stick where we want you to stick, and that's in a fourth line role, you've got to be winning board battles, and you have to be pretty hard for guys to push off the puck. And again, I don't know if there was enough improvement there. I definitely think there was some when it comes to the physical side of the game, but yeah, nothing special for Nils Aman. Okay, Phil Giuseppe. I was very generous with Phil. I had Phil at A minus in the regular season.
Jesus, man.
Oh, come on. He was playing on the top line for how long was he there? Like 2 months? 1 month?
Yeah, like 6 weeks or something.
Well, come on. That buys you that if he had done that all season, he's an A plus plus.
Yeah,
He
of
only did it for
course.
a
Yeah.
bit. I
Yeah, and
like
how
Phil
much did he
Giuseppe.
produce there?
Look, man, it's not
Come
about how much
on.
you produce. He was there and they were winning games at the end of the day. And that was a line that was playing really well.
And he was like a D player the rest of the way.
Yeah, but he missed some time. I feel for Phil. I feel for Phil. I am at an A minus. Maybe it's too high.
You're just giving him love because he's Italian.
And he's a friend of the show. He's been on Canucks Combo, and he player
He's
who's been on
he's a
Canucks
very
Combo.
nice guy, but
Yeah.
I give him a C plus for the regular season and a C plus for playoffs.
Wow, you hate Phil Giuseppe.
I mean, relative to you, I guess.
Okay, what did you have in the playoffs?
A C plus.
Okay, I had a B minus in the playoffs. Yeah.
See, B minus, I'm like, okay, I can at least live with. That's an acceptable level of call it bias, call it homerism. But what was the grade again for the regular season? An A minus?
A minus. That's not that
Dude,
great.
that is pretty crazy. Like, if you said B, I would have been like, you're being a homer, but I'll let it slide. A minus that's foul.
Okay, fine. I'll officially lower my grade for Phil Giuseppe. Well, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm sticking with it. Phil Giuseppe, gets an A- for me. Oh, you know who we haven't talked about, Harmon? Elias Lindholm. We didn't talk about
Right.
him.
Yeah.
Regular season, like not including his time in Calgary, right? We're just including his regular
Yeah.
season time with the Canucks. Relative to expectations, I had him in a C- in the regular season. And then I had him at, and C- is maybe too low because he was really good defensively and he was good on faceoffs and everything. But I just think what we were expecting from him, like I'm trying to grade this relative to
Yeah.
expectations, right? I did have Lindholm at a C-, and then in the playoffs, I had him at an A.
Yeah. So in the regular season, when Drancer and I did it, we gave him an incomplete just because of the whole injury situation. And you're like, okay, this guy was banged up. So that's maybe a cop out. If I had to give a letter grade purely on performance, ignoring the injury aspect, then yeah, I mean, I'd probably be in C territory, C plus, maybe if I'm being generous. So not too far off what you had for him. And then for the playoffs, I had an A- for him.
I like A-. I like A-. He was
He
a
was
totally different player. He was the reverse Nils Hoglander.
he was their third best forward after Boeser and Miller.
Yep. Yeah. No disagreement there. And he's gonna be a big topic of conversation as we go on into the offseason. Like, let's be honest here. So, are we done forwards now? Did we forget anybody?
Lafferty. Or did you
No,
give
we
your
did
grade?
Lafferty.
Okay, my bad.
Yeah, it was bad grades. Like we did give our grades for Lafferty,
Yeah, we
right?
did. We did. Yeah.
Okay,
You're right.
good. Have we forgotten anybody then? Like I think we got every
I
forward.
don't I think we got the forwards.
Okay. Danila Klimovich? No, we're not doing it. We're not doing it. Yeah, okay. So we got all the forwards. Let's move on to the defense. Quinn Hughes, regular season. I know your grade, my grade as well. A plus. Playoffs, I had him at a B.
Yeah, pretty similar. A plus for the regular season and a B plus for the playoffs. Even
No,
though, and like the interesting thing is, like, even though he wasn't taking games over offensively the way we expected, and even though the improvements that he showed as a shooter and as an individual scorer in the regular season didn't translate to the playoffs, it was still a night and day difference in terms of how well the Canucks drove play with Quinn Hughes on the ice compared to any other defense pairing. It was a massive, monumental difference. And I was actually surprised at how much he tilted the ice when, to my eye, he visibly struggled to move the puck with the same level of escapability, poise, and sort of being a one-man breakout machine compared to the regular season. Like, I didn't think he was actually that impressive on zone exits as we're accustomed to. And yet, from a possession and territorial standpoint, the Canucks were still like, it was lopsided, where when he was on the ice, the Canucks dominated play. When he wasn't on the ice, the Canucks got caved and hemmed in defensively.
okay, Philip Hronek. What did you have here? I had a B plus for the regular season, and I had a C plus for the playoffs.
Yeah, pretty similar. At a B plus for the regular season. He was terrific through the first 50 games of the season, looked like an elite supporting piece, and then sort of fell off, looked like a passenger down the stretch. And then into the playoffs, I had him at, I'm trying to remember what I wrote, whether it was a C minus or a C. I think I had him at a C ultimately.
Yeah, I think it's a very fair grade. I think it's a fair grade for what we saw in the playoffs. And like you said, it was kind of an extension of what we saw down the tail end of the regular season. Every time we talk about him, I'm going to make sure I say it clearly in case we have new listeners. Do not sign Philip Hronek to anything that starts with an 8 as the average. No, just can't. You just can't do it. And we're going to have a long off season to talk about all that, but you can't. You can't do it. Moving on, Tyler Myers. Oh, Harmon. I was waiting for this. Tyler Myers, A plus, A plus.
Oh, come on. You did not actually give him an A plus, A plus.
I'm not saying relative to your cap hit. It's relative to
I
expectations.
know it's not relative to. Well,
A
okay.
plus,
How low were your expectations? Did you expect him to be like awful coming into the season?
No, he's my golden star boy. I have him this high on my expectations, but everybody else is slagging on him. His expectations for Tyler Myers were super low coming into this season. But I always say it. I always say Tyler Myers is criminally underrated. And this year, he wasn't. He was great. He was great all season long.
He can't be. Okay, so let me clarify. I have what I would consider like nice grades for him. I thought he had a good season, but he cannot be an A+ when you consider how disastrous the start to the season was.
Okay, that's fair.
Do you
I
remember
actually
that?
get scratched at the start of the year. So I'm gonna change my grade officially for Tyler Myers. I'm gonna give him an A-.
Okay, see, that's actually close to fair. I had him at a B+ for the regular season. For the playoffs, I had him at a B-, which might seem a little bit harsh. And this will be sort of an extension of the Soucy discussion as well, because to me, that defense pair was bend but don't break in the playoffs, right? And so you can say, yes, they defended the inside really well. They didn't allow backdoor passes. They, for the most part, held up McDavid, but the Canucks generated zero offense with that defense pair on the ice. And that wasn't just like, of course, you cut them some slack for the second round because they were mostly up against McDavid. But even in the Nashville series, like when we discuss Vancouver's difficulty manufacturing offense, I think a lot of it does start with after Quinn Hughes, you didn't have enough like truly high-end defensemen in your lineup. So to me, Myers did his job perfectly fine in the playoffs, like considering what he is as a player versus what role he was put into. I was happy with his playoff performance, but I don't think we can overlook just how anemic the Canucks were offensively with Myers on the ice.
That's fair. Moving on, we have Carson Soucy. Carson Soucy, relative to expectations, I had him at an A, and similar to what you were just saying about the playoffs, I had him at a B+ in the playoffs.
Yeah, so I had him at a B- for the playoffs, and then trying to pull up my regular season grade here. One sec. B+ for the regular season. And again, like this is where when I think we would be surprised a little bit. The Canucks were outshot 88-32 with Soucy on the ice at 5-5. Like they got their teeth kicked in territorially, but again, they defended well. They limited the actual damage on the scoreboard. So it's a matter of, okay, they did their job, but put it this way, Myers is going to be a free agent. And for as much as he played well and you're thinking, okay, what if you can bring him back? What I think about is what if Carson Soucy had had the type of partner who could actually move the puck and sort of handle those sort of puck transportation responsibilities while also being decent enough defensively to hold down a matchup role. Like, what if Soucy had an actual like high-end partner? Because with Soucy, I loved his play without the puck. I thought he was great on the PK as well. But in the regular season, on many occasions, I was praising how, okay, under pressure, he's actually more poised with the puck than I thought. In the playoffs, I thought he had a really tough time breaking it out. And not that he had egregious turnovers, but he just couldn't make clean exits. And I don't think that's like, I'm not going to criticize him for that because he's a $3.25 million defenseman. If Soucy could defend the way he could and move pucks out, he'd be like a $5 million defenseman. But moving forward, it's just like in a perfect world, you'd love to get him a puck mover because then it's like that's like an actually high end shutdown pair. Because again, offensively, the Canucks generated less than 13 shots on goal per hour offensively with Soucy on the ice. Like nothing was happening for the Canucks from an attacking perspective.
Okay, we're at the bottom pair now. Nikita Zadorov, Ian Cole. Nikita Zadorov, I had him at a B for the regular season. I had him at an A for the playoffs.
Yeah, I think I had him exactly the same for both regular season and playoffs. Because, yeah, I mean, in the regular season, he was decent. He filled the gaps when necessary. Of course, Soucy was hurt when Zadorov first came in, and he was a stabilizing, much-needed presence there. But he wasn't blowing anybody away. He wasn't knocking anybody's socks off. There's nobody screaming and shouting, "You have to keep Nikita Zadorov." But in the playoffs, he was such a monster. He did everything, throwing the bone-crushing hits, chipping in with offense, having enough speed and skill, like just enough so that he wasn't a liability moving the puck. Terrific playoffs for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Ian Cole. Ian Cole had him at a B+ for the regular season. I had him at a C+ for the playoffs.
Yeah, so B plus for the regular season, and I know Drancer gave him a C plus in the report cards. I was a little bit more harsh. I for the purposes of this, it didn't actually show up in print, but I had him at a C. Um, of course, he was hurt, which Rick Dollywell reported, so that's important context. But I just think that Oilers series was so tough that, like, put it this way, when we're discussing playoffs, I thought it was unfair to give Myers and Soucy a B minus and then have Cole at a C plus. Like I needed more of a gap between those guys just because I do think there was a pretty significant gap between how well Soucy/Myers played and then how much like where Cole's performance was at.
Okay. We do need to wrap up and get to anyone else, so let's not go too much further. Do you want to just finish on Noah Juulsen? Like goalies, I don't think we really have to do. It's pretty obvious who is going to get, like, what the grades are going to be for the goaltender. Let's quickly just do it. Don't need to explain it. I have an A plus for Thatcher Demko. Obviously, it's a bit incomplete in the playoffs. A plus for the regular season for Demko. Also an A plus in his one game that he played of the playoffs. Archer Shilovs, I had his regular season as a B. He didn't play great in the AHL, but that really doesn't matter when you come out and play the way you do in the playoffs. Archer Shilovs is an A plus as well. And I feel like we don't really need to give grades for Casey DeSmith, but if I do, I have him at a B plus and a B plus.
Yeah, let's just leave it at that. I don't have goalie grades off the top of my head.
No worries. Okay, Noah Juulsen. I had him in an A plus and an A plus. No, I'm kidding. I didn't. I had Noah Juulsen at actually I should pull it up. Yeah, okay. I had Noah Juulsen at a C plus for the regular season. He took some really big strides. He was really good, but also, became quite clear he wasn't going to be more than a third pairing guy. And then in the playoffs, I had him at a C.
Wow, I'm gonna be higher on Juulsen than you for once.
Wow.
I
Okay,
had him
let's
at
hear
B
it.
for the regular season.
Oh, that's fair. Yeah.
Because, like, put it this way, he was in the AHL last year.
Mm-hmm.
And so for him to be a serviceable 6'7" defenseman, and I know he was, for the first 6 weeks, awful, but from that point onward, he was really steady and sturdy. You didn't worry about having him in the lineup or, oh, he's our sixth defenseman. Can we trust him? Plus, he was excellent on the PK, in my opinion. So I give him B in the regular season. For the playoffs, he only played 2 games. He wasn't great in either one, to be totally honest. He had an egregious mistake in both playoff games that he appeared in that led to a goal against. So for the playoffs, it's only 2 games, so it's tough to grade a guy, but it probably would be a C for me as well there.
Canucks Conversation is live Monday through Friday, every weekday at 2 p.m. over on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, and interact in the YouTube live chat every day with us, folks.